the other element of this is that entrepreneurs, startups have a 10% chance of success, but founders believe they have an 82% likelihood of success. That the gap in between that is why I wrote the book, is trying to shine a light for founders on what's actually happening, and that the financial markets and ecosystem are not always in your best interest. And sometimes there's a misalignment, and you just need to be aware of the realities of it.
So why 82%? Where did that number come from?
It was just a study that I read. It may have been a little older now, but I do think it's consistent anecdotally with what I find entrepreneurs. And I'm okay with optimism, right? I love optimism. But it's one thing to say the glass is half full, but if it's 90% empty, it's not a half full glass, right? So, I think it's just, optimism is good, but you also need to be aware of the realities of what it means to grow and to try to scale really aggressively and to raise money to do that.
And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is Matt Watson, and very excited to be joined today by Dave Hirsch, who's general partner of Metamorph Partners, and he just wrote a great book called Reignition about entrepreneurs getting stuck. Based on his long experience as an entrepreneur, started a bunch of different things, worked at Andreessen Horowitz, buys businesses, turns businesses around, done all the different things. I think he's seen entrepreneurship from every angle. And Dave, is it fair to say, still trying to figure out what you want to do when you grow up? And
fair to say that, yeah.
I know how it goes. Process of figuring it out. And once you become an entrepreneur, I feel like you have entrepreneur ADHD or something like that, and we all just are doing all these different things and can't help ourselves. Before we get started, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Fullscale, which is my company. We have 300 employees in the Philippines helping do software development for dozens of other startups and scale-ups. You can check us out at fullscale.io. Well, Dave, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
I think it's pretty incredible. You bootstrapped a company went public, sold companies. Now you're buying companies and turning them around, done all the different things. I guess I have to ask, what is your favorite of all the different things you've done?
It keeps changing over time. I love more and more what I'm doing. But, the book was a reflection of the fact that anytime I was building these companies and we were lean, disciplined, purposeful, that we would create a lot of value. Anytime we raised too much money, we would make poor decisions. Usually created situations that we had to get out of later. And so I love those periods of time, when, I'm sure you've seen this in your business, when you're just firing on all cylinders, when things are happening, the culture is great, people love it, the scoreboard is in your favor, and it just feels like you're part of something magic.
But I thought if you had more money, it would solve all your problems. So how did the money create all the problems? What is the pattern you see there?
Well, so now I'm in the mode of fixing stuck startups as a consultant, an advisor, as a coach, but also occasionally acquire companies too. Fall in love with them, and I think it's a fierce desire on the part of a lot of CEOs to raise money because it can alleviate a lot of pains. But there's also a tendency to be blind to some of the long-term pains that raising that money can create. And so, I'm not against venture capital by any means. I'm fully supportive of it, but I am against too much venture capital, and to really kind of dig into the reasons why companies are raising. I think it's more of a situation for me of raise when it's irresponsible not to, right? When you really can't keep up with demand, and, the company's really taken off, and you need to support the, just taking care of your customers, and, supporting the expansion that you're already feeling. So that's my tendency, and what I see happen a lot of times is that raising money feels like success to founders.
Yeah.
Right. And in the book, I say experienced founders will brag about how little they raised, but earlier founders will brag about how much they raised, and it inevitably creates problems because it's usually meant to fuel growth, obviously, but the growth that it's trying to fuel is usually not based on the strongest foundation. And it's usually built around a false narrative of a few data points or, doing well in one market, but assuming that other markets are going to be just as easy as that first market. And so that's what I tend to see in a lot of the companies that I find that get stuck is they're just trying to scale prematurely and raise money on a narrative that's not backed up by actual data science.
So I had one of those companies in 2008, 9, 10. My company was doubling every size in a year. We couldn't keep up with the growth. People always say they want to have that problem where they have more customers than they know what to do with. Like we literally had that problem. And we couldn't raise money because it was 2008, 2009. We were in the automotive industry. Like nobody that was getting an investment was not the time. So we had to bootstrap the whole thing the whole way. But I think we were like the ideal customer that like should be raising money. Like we can't keep up with the growth. Like we need to hire the right people, upgrade our data center, train more people. Like we needed all the things. But I think you're right. Like a lot of times, I hate it when people put on their podcast bio, LinkedIn, whatever. They're like raised $50 million. I'm like, what? So what does that mean? Like that's your biggest accomplishment? You raised a bunch of money. The company failed. The investors lost all their money, and you're proud of it. Okay.
I always crack up when I see that as well.
But the early stage companies, I guess there's a difference between raising money for like early stage and seed, right? We're like, oh, we have an idea. We need some money to prove out the idea, right? Versus VC money and when you're really trying to double down and really grow it. But there's a fine line in the middle somewhere, right? Between like how you describe those things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, seed capital is its own thing. But I think a lot of times, entrepreneurs and sometimes the investors too, assume that there is this 18-month cycle. So you take this seed money and that gets you through 18 months and then you raise this money round and then you raise this round. So I think, it's fine to raise capital to go prove out that there is product market fit and understanding what that means. But then subsequent to that product market fit, what you raise and how you architect the growth plan and the financial needs of the business should be based on market realities, not a playbook approach of raise every certain amount of time. And I think that lemming-like playbook approach is what gets a lot of companies into trouble. So I tend to think about it as there are periods in a business where you need to have your antennae up, meaning you're trying to learn about what's happening in the market, and there's periods in the business where you have your blinders on, and that's when you're trying to scale it and grow and execute. People want to switch from antenna to blinders way too quickly, right? They want to just start growing and scaling, but they're not really ready to do that. And they haven't understood the market realities enough or have data points to justify growing. And that's where I see it being problematic. So again, it's not so much, whether venture capital, it's how much and when and for what purpose and how is it supporting the underlying strategy of the business and the market realities it's playing in.
Yeah, I talked to a founder from Kansas City a couple weeks ago. He called me looking for advice on raising capital and stuff, and I think he was really wanting me to invest, but of course he didn't ask me bluntly. And he was burning $200,000 a month. And so I asked him, like, hey, you lost 200 grand last month. What do you have to show for it? and the answer was not much, very little. But he was one of those founders that he can't make the hard decision of like, look, we have to cut our burn rate. We've got to let some people go. We got to make the hard decisions. They're just burning money. I imagine you'll agree with me. I say that's part of the issue you have when you go raise this money is somebody like him. He raised a bunch of money, inflated all of his expenses, hired all the people, probably threw money at problems, didn't actually solve problems, right? Threw a lot of money at problems. He hired people, but never solved any of the fundamental problems of the business, but just tried to throw money at them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you look at our country and how many rich people are out there throwing money at problems and how unhappy they actually are. I think it's probably equivalent to, what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and those periods where you are austere and lean and everybody's probably got too many hats they're wearing and they're stretched thin, but they're actually making it work are some of the most profoundly beautiful moments in a company. I think with the ones that create the most value. Money just gets in the way of that. And it keeps you further away from understanding the market realities. And you hire too many people in between you and what's actually happening with the customer. You make poor decisions and you get into, again, this playbook thinking where, I just so many companies, that are burning $200,000, $400,000, $800,000 a month and just think that's normal, and that's part of this economic plan that they're on. The other element of this is that entrepreneurs, startups have a 10% chance of success, but founders believe they have an 82% likelihood of success. That the gap in between that is why I wrote the book, is trying to shine a light for founders on what's actually happening, and that the financial markets and ecosystem are not always in your best interest. And sometimes there's a misalignment, and you just need to be aware of the realities of it.
So why 82%? Where did that number come from?
It was just a study that I read. It may have been a little older now, but I do think it's consistent anecdotally with what I find entrepreneurs. And I'm okay with optimism, right? I love optimism. And, but, it's one thing to say the glass is half full, but if it's 90% empty, it's not a half full glass, right? So, I think it's just, optimism is good, but you also need to be aware of the realities of what it means to grow and to try to scale really aggressively and to raise money to do that. And then, what the snowball effect of raising that money is on the likelihood of your success. And I think if people could go leaner, longer, and keep that antennae up to really understand what's happening in the market and to find the place that they are meant to occupy in the world, then they can scale later, and that's okay to do that. But I think they just try to jump the gun and grow. And there's a lot of forces telling them to do that. I don't place blame on the entrepreneur for being blind or dumb or anything. It's just we have a whole financial ecosystem that is trying to convince them to take money. When I came out of college 30 years ago, it was $8 billion a year invested in venture capital. And now it's like 200 to 300 billion or more a year, right? And we haven't seen that much growth. So there's a whole financial ecosystem and media system and just the machinery of capitalism telling them this is what it looks like to be successful. You go out and you raise money and you grow that way. And we have egos and we have insecurities, and they're often subconsciously at play in some of these decisions of wanting to look good, wanting to be successful, wanting to come through for our team. It's not bad. I still do all these things, right? Like I still make these decisions. It can be hard to see, but if we're able to kind of peel it back and look and get in touch with our intuitive sense of what the right thing to do is for the business, if we're able to go leaner, longer, if we're able to spend more time with customers and really listen and empathize with the market realities and the buyers that we're trying to serve, that eventually we can get to a point where you can raise money and then it really takes off. And I think that's the thing that I'm trying to shine a light on for founders, to see what real growth looks like, what it means to be in that 10% of successful companies, and how to do it in a way which is not the playbook way, but in a way that has a much higher likelihood of success in the long run.
So what percentage of companies actually raise real VC money? I don't mean like friends and family money, but like real VC institutional money. Isn't it like 2%, 3%, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you classify as a startup, right? I mean, if you just considering everybody who has a barber shop or, hair salon or, like yoga studio, that, it's going to be a small percentage of the overall whole. I'm primarily speaking to people who are doing growth startups, right? And so it doesn't have to be venture-backed companies to get a lot of value from the book and the work that I do.
Yeah.
But it is companies who are trying to grow and have ambitious standards for what that growth should look like. So that can be bootstrappers that are, but trying to grow aggressively. It can be people who take private equity, people who take friends and family money. But if the goal is to grow something more than, 30 or 40% a year, then that's where you start to get into, some of the challenges that I talk about.
Well, I think it's also important to realize that growing 30 to 40% a year is a huge success, right? For most
Exactly. It's amazing.
For most businesses, it's a huge success. For full scale for my business, growing 40% this year would be an insane year. Like that would be a monster year, especially in this economy and this time that we're in. But in early stage startups, if you're doing $1 million a year in revenue, like 40% may not seem all that exciting. But most SaaS companies and tech companies kind of get stuck between doing like 1 and 5 million a year in revenue, right? Like they kind of get in that place and get stuck.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I do for a lot of the buyouts that I look at these are companies that were trying to grow 100, 200% a year. They were the wannabe unicorns, and what I do is transform them into what's called a rule of 40 business, if you know the
Yeah.
term, where the profits and the growth rate collectively add up to 40. So maybe 40% growth rate, then break even, or maybe, 30% growth rate and 10% profitability, whatever. It's a benchmark for, a healthy company. So that's what I'm trying to do, is help these companies get into that space where they can profitably grow and where it's organic. And it's more fun. It can make more money for everybody involved. The likelihood of success is much greater, and it takes that burden off of the founders and the team to try to just meet unrealistic standards, or to die prematurely.
Well, it's significantly easier to buy something and grow it than to start from scratch, right?
I have learned that. Yeah. Plus, I'm older now. I just don't have as much time left.
It's so much work to start from zero. And this actually kind of happened with my company, Full Scale. I had a business partner, and a few months ago I bought him out. And so, he was kind of ready to retire and go do something else, and I was in the same situation. It's like, man, it's a rule of 40 company, profitable, growing. Like, I'm just going to buy him out and just keep growing this thing. Like, so much, it sounds so much better than starting something anew. And why I don't think enough people think about that, and I guess it's hard if you don't have the capital, right? You can't buy something. So tell us a little more about your guys' company and what you do in regards to those buyouts, what you're looking for, kind of what your model is for that.
Yeah, we're a little unique in that we don't have a fund, but we'll go raise the money when we find companies that we like.
Okay.
And so my life is part, going out and speaking on the book, and, doing podcasts like this, and promoting the book, and I just love talking to entrepreneurs. It's my happy place.
Me
Right.
too.
And so that one doesn't really pay much, but I just love doing it. Then there's the consulting and advising and coaching work I do, which is, I get hired sometimes by VC firms or by companies directly to come and help defibrillate companies if they need a second act. What does that look like? And so I'll come in to help them design that second act. And then sometimes, yeah, I will find companies I fall in love with, and will raise the money to go acquire them. And that's a fun process. But the characteristics would be, for me, it's software companies that are in the $5 to $20 million revenue range, where they've had success, but maybe they've raised a lot of money and they have a cap table, a lot of investors who are it's going to be hard for them to make their money. Right? It didn't match the expectations that those investors had when they made the original investment. And so I'll recapitalize it and keep the team and get heavily involved. That's why I can't do that many. To roll up the sleeves and support the team and coach the CEO, help them hire, and literally smile and sales for them. Right? That's, kind of what you have to do in these companies. So I wouldn't say it's sexy work, but I love it. Right? I just love having a foot in entrepreneurship, and that was my background. As I get a little bit older, I don't need to be the CEO anymore, but now I can support other teams doing it. And so, yeah, I enjoy it. And it's, yeah, usually companies that maybe it's not Google, right? It's not these companies that are, that are just naturally going to be a unicorn and go public, but have really good companies. They have great cultures, they have great products, and they have that natural 30-40% growth rate, that they
Yeah.
can do profitably. And so it's a nice process to go through where the company can kind of restructure around its core business. In other words, it's the thing that it is best in the world at doing. Right. And usually the growth plans have gotten in the way of that. Right. For example, if you were really good at selling to insurance companies, but you also tried to sell to banks, and you tried to sell to automotive or whatever it is, like, that didn't work as well. The work that I do would kind of peel it back into, well, what is your core? What is your essence as a business? And what are you the best in the world at doing? And let's streamline the company around that, and let's get it healthy and profitable and growing. And then whatever growth we do in the future is going to organically build from that core. It's not going to be overly ambitious growth that is, pulling from different markets or different buyers or a different set of characteristics that are too far removed from where the core is. It's going to be a natural extension of that company's superpower.
So for some of these companies, why are they selling? Is it the founder got the company to a certain stage, but they're not necessarily the right person to get it to the next stage? Or, why do you see some of these companies wanting to sell?
Well, again, if they've raised a lot of investment capital and that capital is just not going to get paid out, so if a company raised a $500 million valuation, but it was clear that that's not going to happen, they're never going to be able to sell for that, and then there's no strategic buyers lining up to pay for them. And then, it's just the investors know it's going to take a long time and a lot of their time, and they're really not going to make a return on that money. And so it just needs a different cap structure that is in support of the right trajectory for that business. So in some of those cases, that's what's happening. It could be that, it's been around for a long time, and it's done fine, but the investors want 10x returns, and for them to wait around to get a 2x return is not going to be as interesting. Or sometimes it's just the founder really just wants a different scenario to back them. Sometimes it was, you can look at, companies that are carve outs or spin outs of, larger companies. The larger company may have bought this startup and then it just didn't really work. It didn't fit. And then they want to spin it back out. And that's, a nice scenario, especially if there's still founders involved. And, everything else under the sun. But those are the primary ones that I look at where it's not meeting the venture scale requirements that they're looking for. And, venture investors, just if they know they're going to spend too much time on it, then you can come acquire the company and get it off their books and, have a structure that works for what the business should be doing.
Well, if your business is stuck because you can't hire software developers, you can definitely check us out at Fullscale. Check out fullscale.io if you need to hire software developers. But Dave, I'm curious, what are some of the other reasons you see that entrepreneurs get stuck? I feel like we're always stuck for one thing or another. It's like an issue with sales, an issue with marketing, got this person I need to fire, I need to make a key. It's always something, right? I'm curious, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs that always feel that way every day when we wake up?
Yeah, I have the book here, and I have a whole section on the, chapter 1, which is like why companies get stuck. And so, there are a lot of them that are under that heading of scaling prematurely, like hiring the wrong team, right? And that can be, you hired B and C players. It could mean that you hired people who are better for a mature stage company. You can just hire too many people, more than you needed at the time. It could be that you hired well in the department that you came from. So I see a lot of product founders who hire really good product teams, but then when it comes to sales and marketing, they're just like, just insert this person here. They don't know how to hire for sales and marketing. They don't get the best quality, and they try to run it like a product organization. They try to over-engineer sales and marketing. So you get that. You get there's a problem I call kind of buying into a false narrative. And so this is the using, a limited set of data points to justify, larger growth activities and raising too much money. And I see that happen with CEOs, right? Where they'll take a few select data points.
Yep.
Turn that into a narrative that may allow them to raise funding, but then they're in a situation where they've got to base that funding on, not that they were, lying overtly, but they were telling a story, and they tell it to themselves that they use as the basis for that money, but it's maybe more advanced a story than they really, is really the case for the company. And that becomes a snowball, right? Because then it's like, well, you have to live up to the story that you raise money on, and then you got to try to raise more money, and you're just always, behind the gun on any of that stuff.
We had one of those companies here in Kansas City. Actually, they raised over $30 million, and I think it's because they had all these potential customers lined up, right? They had shown a lot of interest that we're going to do all these big things and whatever, and they didn't close any of the deals. But somehow or another, they managed to raise $30 million based on all that interest from these potential customers that were, these big enterprise deals, and the whole thing went to zero.
Yeah, surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's hard. And again, I don't fault the entrepreneurs per se, but because the system is telling a lot of these stories, and that's what they read in the paper, and their peers are promoting it. And but I'm trying to shine a light on that there is another path, and it just requires more discipline, and more analysis. So in chapter 1, I talked to a guy named Tom Eisenman, who's a Harvard business professor who wrote the book on why startups fail. And a lot of it comes down to that analysis, just getting much, much better at really analyzing and understanding the market before you make some of these decisions. And I think that becomes a problem. So yeah, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about how they lose focus, how they try to whiteboard their way into market expansion and try to get into too many markets too quickly, and never really become deeply integrated into their beachhead market enough to win that decisively, which is a much better approach to building these companies. Being really, really good at one thing. And, it's just a lot of those problems that come with someone really trying to be further along, being willing to be lean and austere and disciplined and empathetic to the market, right? Really, really deeply understand what's happening in the market and play around and experiment and be thoughtful. There's always that pressure to want to get the answer and have the answer and go, 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 go. And, I see them at the other end of that process. When they're saying, just wish I had known, And when I give my presentation, you can tell a lot of people come up and go, this gave me stomach pains just seeing this because, I've been through it now. I wish I had known. I wish I had, seen what was really going on in the system and, what some of the common pitfalls and challenges and missteps that.
Well, things never happen as fast as you think they're going to happen, right? Like my background is in software development, so I definitely know, like, if you think something's going to take a month to build, it probably is going to take 2 months to build or 3 months to build.
Yeah.
Like, it's inevitable. But I think that's true about almost all parts of running a business, right? You think, oh, I'm going to run this big marketing campaign. Are we going to get these giant results out of it? And odds are probably not, right? Like, we hire a new head of sales. Are we overnight going to see, big results from it? Probably not. Like, everything takes way longer than you think it's going to take. And to some degree, it doesn't matter what you do. Like, you cannot speed up the process for some of these things. They just take time.
Yep, that's exactly right. And just a lot of work and a lot of listening and experimenting and, getting out of your own head and your own desire to put the answer out there, meaning to push a product to the market and to start to kind of take time to feel the pull. The pull of the market is much more interesting. And all the companies I've worked with, when you feel that pull, it's a pretty magical thing, but it takes a long time and a lot of patience to feel that pull in the right way and to get it right. And entrepreneurs are very excitable and want to have the answer, but it just takes a lot longer to get there than maybe they're really.
So is your advice for people to be more on the bootstrapping side and lightly funded side?
Yeah, I think it's, usually lighter, longer until that pull really comes, at which point do the responsible thing for the business. So don't raise money to raise money. Don't try to follow a path that is somebody else's. And I messed this up. We bootstrapped a company that was very successful. But then every time I would raise money, I would make a lot of dumb decisions and waste the money. And then, you were talking about 2008 and, I talk about it in the book. I had to do a big layoff in 2008 of a third of the company. So I'd fire like 65 people because we raised 15 million from Sequoia and then spent a bunch of it stupidly and, thought we were growing the business in the right way. And then we, got way more productive with fewer people. And in 2009, we grew incredibly fast and we were putting more cash back in the business. So I think there's a lot that you can accomplish on a small team. And having seen this so many times now, you can get a lot more done than you think with those small teams. And I think what happens is companies will raise money and then they'll hire the people and then they can't imagine not having those people.
Right.
I'll come into some companies sometimes and, shrink it by 75%. It actually opens up more productivity. And as much as I don't like firing people, it can be the best thing ever for the company. And you can be very supportive to the people that you have to let go. You can do it in a very enlightened, supportive way. But it can be the best thing for the company in all of these cases.
Well, I had this problem in one of my own companies where it's like we were doing a bunch of stuff we should have never been doing to begin with. And then it's like you hire a manager to then manage all that stuff that you weren't supposed to be doing to begin with, right? And, inevitably, I feel like a lot of big corporations, that's what you end up with. You end up with just like, we're doing a lot of these things that are like pet projects, like secondary, tertiary things. And then we have more people to manage those things and more people to manage those people. And like, yeah, the core of the business kind of gets lost. And the more money you have, it's easier to do all these pet projects.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Sometimes, if I acquire a company where a new CEO is coming on board to help transform it, they don't know all those things. They don't have that background. So they'll just, cut. And it turns out to be a great thing, But a founder CEO or somebody who's been with the business for a long time will be reluctant to do that because they think, well, if I cut that person, then that thing goes away, or they have this beautiful mind, picture of the company where all these things are a tapestry of different connections, and if one thing goes away, and the whole thing falls apart. But the reality is, companies figure it out, and they can operate leanly. And when you do that, people feel a sigh of relief because they knew that things weren't really working in the past. And, it can be an incredibly healthy thing for a business to get back to what it's best at and have a team that's in support of that.
Well, and for sure, there's always somebody on the team that looks at the leadership and says, like, I can't believe you guys won't fire these people. Like, there's these people that need to be fired that you won't fire. That are terrible at their jobs, right? And so,
Yeah.
inevitably, it kind of discredits you as a leader too. Like, some of the weird decisions you make, that you won't make those hard decisions. Like, the smart people around you really take notice of that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They will know, and they will see it, and they'll believe in you. They'll have trust that you're looking out for the best interest of the company. And
So when you make those hard decisions, those people that get it, they get it. They're like, yeah, this needed to be done a long time ago.
yeah, there's a blind loyalty problem that comes in there too, right? I think I'm doing a post about that this week, which is that idea that I owe it to this person. They've been with me for a while, and I need to see it through with them. And that blind loyalty can be ultimately what kills the company so many times. I'm still great friends with so many people I've fired through the years just because they weren't the right person for the business at that time.
So I actually just had this happen. We had somebody that was working for us, and she may listen to this, and that's okay. And went to her and said, "Hey, we don't really have full-time work for you. We really only need you part-time." And actually ended up, everybody was really nervous about having to make this change, but inevitably it made her extremely happy because it freed her up to go do some other things that were better for her, where we were asking her to do some weird jobs and different things that weren't really things that she wanted to do. Like, we were trying to find work for her to do. Inevitably, we're giving her work to do that she didn't want to do. So when we finally made the decision of like, hey, we got to do this, like, it ended up being like a huge positive for everyone, including her.
Yeah.
The hard decision, we finally made the hard decision.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. It should happen all the time. I think we're getting better at it as a society. Some of the independent contractors, and people are floating in between companies. It used to be that you worked at one company for life, and now it's just, just constant, like, permeable membranes of companies that are just constantly flowing people in and out. It's more like Hollywood. People come together, make a movie, and some people leave, come back together, work on good things. So I do think we're getting better at it, but entrepreneurs still suffer from holding on to too many people for too long.
So tell us a little more about your book, Reignition, and some other things that people could learn from your book. We talked about getting stuck and VC and bootstrapping. Like, what are some other things people can learn from your book?
Yeah, so the book goes through that to start, which is why companies get stuck structurally, both from the financial ecosystem as well as things like, trying to scale prematurely. It goes into the psychological blind spots that give rise to some of these decisions. Confronting your own inner demons is really important, right? So if you have a lot of fears and insecurities that are driving decision making, like raising too much money, you have to understand them and confront them. And so I tell a story about a guy who he's based in St. Louis, a guy named Jesse Puggi, who built a company called Ampush. And if you know Jesse, yeah, he's great.
Yep.
His coach is a good friend of mine. He was somebody who was just came into his business building this as hard driving. He had a hard driving father, and went to Wharton undergrad, and McKinsey and Goldman, and building this company, as a startup, and it just brought that like high octane, egoic energy to the business, and it got the company going because it was rocket fuel. But it also created a really destructive culture and led to his burnout and his team's burnout, and he was done. But he raised money and he got help through a coach and literally transformed himself into seeing the business as the mechanism to support people's growth and, helping to coach them. And it just transformed his whole style. And he kind of changed, he suddenly had a sense of meaning, and the business took off because he created a healthy culture. And so that idea of the business will transform when you do, right? And to build the company you really want, if it's gotten stuck, you need to confront your own inner challenges that you've had. And so I have a whole chapter on that. And then it gets into the process for transforming companies. It doesn't need to be, new investment or anything. It's just you need a second act for your business, and it means getting back to your superpower, getting back to why you exist as a company and what you're the best at, and shedding everything else and starting from that place and living in that place for a little while, nurturing yourself back to health, slowly and thoughtfully experimenting with growth that extends from that core that you have as a business. And then when you figure out what the company is going to be when it grows up, then you can finance it accordingly. And it doesn't need to be the same type of financing. It doesn't necessarily need to be venture or private equity or whatever you have in mind. There's a lot of different financing mechanisms out there that can support the real growth of the company. I talk about positioning. Like once you actually know and organized around your second act and kind of understood where you're meant to be in the world and how you can grow the company, you position it to really tell the story to the market in a way that's compelling and will support that long-term trajectory of the business.
Sales is always the hardest part of it, right? How do we do sales and marketing? How do we grow this thing? That's always the hardest part.
It is. It can be the most expensive part. A lot of companies get into trouble, right? Especially I think a lot of times now with startups, you get product founders who come from the engineering side, the product management side. They're not strong at go-to-market, and so they end up hiring big, expensive teams, people who look really impressive, but aren't necessarily the right ones for what that business needs, and they waste a ton of money learning a lesson. There's ways to build teams that are where the business is and its type of product, and where the product is and its overall acceptance in the world. Once things really take off, then you have to change the shape of that go-to-market team. So I spent a lot of time on that as well. The shift sales and marketing organization over time as the company becomes more successful.
Well, really appreciate having you on the show today. Again, this is Dave Hirsch talking about entrepreneurs getting stuck, talking about his book, Reignition. Dave, is there anything else you want to share with people on how they could follow you or learn more or work with you?
Yeah, I have a lot at my website, davehirsch.com. It's HERSH.com. The book is for sale. It's called Reignition. It's on Amazon. And I have a newsletter called 1 in 10,000 that you can sign up for on the website. Really appreciate your having me on the podcast today. Thanks for doing the work you're doing, and really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Take care.